This is Dr. John Tolson, and you're listening to the DiscipleMaking podcast. So we started a series a few weeks ago in terms of the question of how do you change our country? And I keep saying that the only way you change our country is to change people, because the country is made up of people. So how do we change people? And I believe that the Lord has given us a strategy to change people in our country and literally around the world. So we're talking about this whole subject of disciple making, or the D word. And what I want to talk about briefly today is, what is discipling? And then next week, I think we're going to talk about what happens if we don't engage in the process of disciple making. But first of all, I want to look at a passage in Deuteronomy chapter 6, just a couple verses there, verses 1 and 2. The scripture says in Deuteronomy 6, "These are the commands, the decrees, the laws the Lord your God directed me to teach you to observe in the land that you are crossing the Jordan to possess, so that you, your children, and their children after them may fear the Lord your God as long as you live, by keeping all his decrees and commands that I give you, and so that you may live a long life and enjoy a long life." And so as the scripture lays out here, God's plan was to develop and build into the lives of future generations. And so we'll see in a week or so what happens when we don't build into the lives of future generations, whether it be through a church, through a ministry, through even a secular organization. If we don't take the basic tenets and build those into the lives of other people who will pass them on, then it will not have the positive impact that we hope will happen for generations to come. So the first basis for understanding disciple making is it involves building into the lives of future generations. The second one comes from a book of Acts, and I'm just going to read a couple verses here. But in Acts chapter 15, beginning with verse 36, we read this. "Sometime later, Paul said to Barnabas, one of his friends, 'Let us go back and visit the brothers in all the towns where we preach the word of the Lord, and see how they're doing.' Barnabas wanted to take John, also called Mark, with him, but Paul did not think it wise to take him, because he had deserted them in Pamphylia and had not continued with them in the work. They had such a sharp disagreement that they parted company. Barnabas took Mark and sailed for Cyprus, and Paul chose Silas and left, commended by the brothers to the grace of God." And so what we have here really is the first church split. So Paul went one direction because John Mark had, quote, pooped out on them at a crucial time of their missionary journey. But Barnabas took John Mark, didn't give up on him, and continued with him. It's very interesting. Barnabas' name means son of encouragement. So he was an encourager. You say, well, who was right and who was wrong? Was Paul just being too difficult? No, I really think in any organization or work or ministry, even in a family, you've got to have somebody that's got the big picture. And I think that was the Apostle Paul, who was willing to make tough decisions even though they might be uncomfortable. On the other hand, you have Barnabas, who always had his focus on the people or the person and their continued development. It's very interesting. Later on, Paul said, "Bring John Mark back. He is now useful for us." He had learned his lessons and he continued to develop and grow. And so through all of that then, the principle in disciple making involves a transfer of leadership when the time is right. And so when the time was right, the Apostle Paul brought John Mark back, and he continued to make a gigantic impact, even, by the way, unto this day. The third principle of disciple making comes from a book in Joshua in the Old Testament, and this is what it says. Chapter 1, verse 1. "After the death of Moses," so Moses has passed away, "the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun," that's N-U-N, not N-O-N-E, Moses' assistant, "Moses, my servant, is dead. Now then you and all these people get ready to cross the Jordan River into the land I am about to give to them and to the Israelites. And I will give you every place where your foot sets down." And so what happens here is we see that Moses had invested his life in a young man named Joshua so that the leadership and the continuity of the effort would continue. It's just like in a cross-country race, or even, I guess I should say, a relay race. One of the key things is the passing of the baton. And so often if you go to a track meet and watch the cross-country team, I don't know why I keep saying cross-country, but the relay team practice the handoff before the race starts, they know that that is pivotal to the winning that race or being successful in that race. And the same way in disciple making, this passing on the baton to Joshua by Moses was critical. So disciple making involves carrying on the plan of God without a break in cadence. And then there's one final thing we want to bring to our attention today, and that comes in the Gospel of Mark, chapter number 3, beginning with verse 13. Jesus went up on a mountainside and called to him those he wanted. They came to him. He appointed 12, designating them as apostles, that they might be with him. Jesus started, I believe, the first clique, the first small group. He put a band of men together, and the first thing he says, he chose them to be with him. So Jesus' methodology to change the planet started with a handful of men whom he built his life in for 3 years, constantly with them. They were constantly in his presence. And so again, we'll talk more about this verse later on, but let me make the principle here in terms of disciple making. Disciple making means training a few to reach all the nations. A few years ago, you might remember the first revolution in Cuba. And I've been told that a newspaper reporter was interviewing Mr. Castro. And they asked him, when you did the first revolution in Cuba, how many key people did it take to do it? He said something like 84. He said, well, if you had a revolution to do over again in the country, how many key people would it take? He said, I could do it with probably around 4. But the 4 would need to be willing to die. It doesn't take a lot to impact the whole country, but it takes a core of people that are deeply committed to Jesus and carrying out his plan of disciple making. You think about that. Thanks for listening to the Disciple Making Podcast. Check out our website at thetolsongroup.com and sign up for my weekly encouraging videos called Red Glasses Talks to come to your email every Monday morning. You can also find me at Dr. John Tolson on social media. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave me a review and share with a friend.